The Girl of Ink and Stars, chapter 23. It can't be, I murmured. Arinta's sword. But it had to be. The shape was rusted with age, but if I squinted, I could change the indentations on its surface into engravings. And if it was, and if I was right about the sea being the other side of this rock, only the sea can defeat a fire demon. This was our final chance. A gift passed down through 1,000 years. I'd said to myself that glass was molten sand. That meant we were beneath a beach, maybe even the beach near Gramera. And that roaring, the roaring that sounded so much like wind and fire, and most of all, water. I brushed my fingers against the sword. It was hot, the metal dull and unpolished, but I felt a surge of energy rush through my skin. My heart threw itself against my chest. I tried to grasp the hilt, but the metal was too hot. I bunched my tunic in my hand and tried again, but it stuck fast. I wrenched and wrenched until Lupe placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. The fight went out of me like air. I felt tears starting in my eyes, gritty and hot. You're right, I said bitterly. I'm not her. But the sword's here. Lupe pulled me into a hug. It's real, Issa. It's not a story. I sniffed. I had been so sure that the sword would turn for me. Behind us, the glass gave another crack. An intense heat flooded the cave, and I looked around in time to see the cracks open into a hole, small but filling rapidly with flame. The air seemed to suck itself through, draining the cavern and filling it with heat. As we watched, the glass dripped down, widening the crack, letting a thin stream of molten rock thread its way through. I turned to Lupe, but she had already placed her hand on the hilt. I saw it blister and smelt burnt skin. Lupe, stop! I tried to pull her scorched hand away, but she pushed me back, eyes wild. I have to, Issa. I have to make amends. For what? My father. I don't understand. I reached out to her, but she stepped back, shaking, blazing with anger. My father knew. He didn't believe it, but he knew about Yote. I gaped at her. The letter said so. Lupe dug her fingernails into her palms, and I could see the skin peeling. That's why he came here. He killed his father and was sent here as punishment. For redemption, I murmured, but Lupe had not heard me. He was meant to help everyone leave, help them escape Yote, but he took over instead. He was rotten, like you said. It's not your fault, I said carefully, trying to make sense of what she was saying. The governor had known Yote wasn't a myth. But before I could ask more, she gripped the hilt again. The metal fizzed against her palms. Lupe, don't! I started towards her, but suddenly, it's working. The sword began to move, to turn. 1,000 years of pressure seemed to release in an instant, though this instant separated itself into distinct moments that would burn in my mind forever. First, another hiss rose to join the one from Lupe's palms. The second movement, a thin stream of water began to spurt out. The third movement, it grew into a torrent. Just as the fire broke through the glass with a deafening crash, the water threw itself towards us. We collapsed under the weight of the sea. Somehow, we found each other's hands. The world turned, not only upside down, but side to side. The ground was ripped again and again. I held on to Lupe in the tumult, or was it that she held on to me? Though her fingers had to be painful from turning the sword. I was pressed down, ears popping as the force of the ocean pinned us in its grasp, thrusting us deeper. We were drowning. Pressure roared through my head. My eyes bulged, breath forced from my chest. The water smashed through Yote's 1,000-year labyrinth as though it were paper, buffeting us along its virulent currents, its power finally released. All I could do was hold fast to Lupe's hand. It was the only thing anchoring me. As suddenly as the world had turned inside out, it rightened. My head surfaced, hitting solid rock. I spluttered, spitting out water and blood. My tongue throbbed where I'd bitten it. Lupe surfaced beside me. My arm was being pulled to the surface too, and then I realised why. I was still holding the woodlight. It was bobbing on the rushing water, steadfast as great-great-grandfather Rios's boat. I pulled Lupe forward, and she grasped the woodlight too. Gripping onto it and each other, we rode the steaming sea through what I could only guess were the tunnels that made up the maze. There was no sign of Tibicinas, nor Yote, nor his flames. He was gone, swallowed by the ocean. Our legs were being snatched at and wrenched down, even as the woodlight kept us afloat. I clenched my teeth as my feet were swirled and pulled until I felt sure my ankles would break. We were swept high into a cave. My feet scraped painfully along the submerged rock, caught between the current and the stone. I cried out and felt Lupe kick my feet out of the way. There was a strange feeling of resistance and a dull thunk, like a clay pot breaking. Then the current released us slightly. I coughed up water. Are you all right? Lupe turned her exhausted gaze upon me, bringing up a lungful of water so violently she almost lost her grip on the woodlight. She was hurt. Hold on! I clamped my hand over hers, looking around frantically. A few metres away, a fainter patch of dark caught my eye. There was an opening. I shouted for joy and instantly swallowed a mouthful of salty water. Look! Lupe's eyes lifted and she nodded. But there was something wrong. Her pupils were large, as if night had slid beneath them. I kicked her, my movements slowed by the sea, tried to keep her awake. She must have hit her head. I brought my mouth close to her ear and shouted, "It's all right! I'll get us home!" The water was rising quickly, and we tilted our heads back to keep our mouths in the pockets of air. I wrapped my spare hand around Lupe's waist and began to kick towards the opening. The hole was perfectly round. It looked almost man-made. Objects were bobbing in the water, bits of cloth, and something that looked very much like bone. One nudged at my face and I pushed it away, fighting to swim closer to the light. It would all be worth it if I could just get us to the surface. Just as the water started to close over our heads, I reached the mouth of the opening. I pulled Lupe beside me and together we gulped in air. Above us, the tunnel seemed to stretch forever. Perhaps it would take us to a way out, but it was narrowing. I could barely squeeze through. Suddenly we stopped rising. My hand was wrenched upwards as the woodlight tried to stay with the surge. I looked down, eyes stinging, trying to pull Lupe with me, but instead saw her dress tugging at her shoulders. It was caught on something. I tried to tear her free, but her body was already wedged in the thinning gap. She was stuck. We were running out of time. The water was high over our heads. My body convulsed, desperate for air. Lupe pushed at me. I saw her mouth working and shook my head. I couldn't tell what she was saying. She tried again, smiling sadly, bubbles spiralling. Still the smallest in the class. Then she tried to let go of the woodlight. I clenched my hand around hers. No! Time suspended itself like a stopped clock as we gazed at each other's blurred faces through the whirling water. My head felt full and empty at the same time, aching. The bright stars were back. My chest screamed. Lupe squeezed my hand softly and rammed the sharp point of the woodlight into my shoulder. I gasped and rose, fast as a bubble, Lupe slipping through my fingers. The pain of my shoulder wrapped itself around me. I tried to pull the woodlight out, but could not. I looked down through the reddening water and saw that Lupe's arm was raised, the bracelet glinting on her wrist, her face calm, the last circles of air leaving her mouth. Then she was gone.